Hello and welcome back to FGCC. In our last video, we closed out the read and commentary from the Gnostic text, Sophia of the Jesus Christ. It prompted a number of questions that I wanted to address in this video. So first off, I'd like to go ahead and thank everybody that has been following us on the channel. We're well over 2,500 subscribers up to this point, and we continue to grow. So the first comment from that particular video comes from at GDR189. He or she says, the equalizing between the male and the female is not purely about individuals within the species, but also about the understanding balance of the aspects of both within everybody as well. So I appreciate that you brought this particular comment to our attention, GDR189, because in that video, I don't think I stressed enough that the purpose of the 12 disciples that Christ pointed out when Mary had asked, what is the purpose of the 12 disciples? Christ had answered that it was in reference to Mary, the female. That I did not make it clear that this was not referring to men versus women in the genetic sense, not in the sense of here's a man, he has a set of genitalia, here's a woman, she has a set of genitalia, but instead is the archetypical understanding of the predominant male way of appreciating what it means to be equal to or at the level of God versus the female aspect. Often in this world, female is equated to lesser, the qualities of female. That means being receptive, being passive, being open, being receptive. Whereas the male being assertive, being aggressive, going to war, these kinds of things, that has really been celebrated within the economic realm that can oftentimes be very violent, and the outward appearance is what is often appreciated and thought to be the very substance of everything. The very thing called the phenomenon versus the nomenon, the world of the nomenon that we cannot see. That's the female aspect that really Christ is referring to. Now, that tends to play itself out, however, more starkly in the physical world, where because men, generally having certain hormones, certain makeup, tends to carry a more spiritually male nature, tends to be more celebrated, and female or women are generally thought to be less. That then shows itself more readily evident in the male versus female dynamics, whereas men generally are, again, much more celebrated, honored, and all of the heroes generally of culture, whereas females are the opposite. Not necessarily because of their genitalia, not because their sex is male or female, but rather that we're talking about the male and female archetype that tends to play itself out more readily in the male body than it does in the female body. Understand, however, there are many men or physical male that can behave much more feminine than many women, and vice versa. In that instance, that's why you tend to see effeminate men tend to be emasculated much more than tomboyish women, as well as the LGBTQ community that's often frowned on because it doesn't fit into that sort of stereotypical idea of us celebrating the male energy or the spiritual male within the kanoma. And there's a whole reasoning behind this, and again, it's to keep Sophia locked in to this realm so that the demiurge can continue to recycle humanity through that process. Because once Sophia has rectified and been able to meditate on and understand that she is at the level of the monad or the male, then that gets everything becomes atoned, and that of course can't happen per the demiurge. So again, thank you GDR for pointing that out, and thank you for following us here on the channel. Horseradish Root 6114 continues to follow us here. Thank you for following us since the beginning inception of this channel that has been ongoing now for about 8 years. So thank you. Continue to show that you are present and with us here. Also, the same goes for Peter Odin, who says, thank you, Thomas. Again, you have given me a lot to meditate on. And Horseradish Root 6114 also says, thank you so much. You're welcome. And then Dodido, I think it is, says, I came for the title, stayed for the info. It's nice to see actual Gnostics delving into the so-called primitive church. Absolutely. Thank you for being here with us and commenting. Kalamala13151 says, does the zodiacs reflect the aeons or archons, sir? So this is a great question. Perhaps I didn't make it clear enough. So in the pleroma, the aeons are called luminaries. And in the konoma, or in the physical realm, the archons are instead known as spheres of influence. They have spheres of influence, whereas aeons have illuminations, or they emanate or illuminate. Now, that illumination that you have in the realm of pleroma trickles its light into this realm, and then the archons go about and try to imitate, if you will, an artificial version, and even archon artificial, they stem from that same articulation. They then take that light and they try to create an imitation. So really, the zodiac here in this realm is a reflection of the luminaries in the pleroma. So when you ask, does the 12 zodiacs reflect the aeons or archons, they in fact do both. Now, the archons are images of the aeons. The aeons are not the reflections, they are the emanations, and the archons reflect back to humanity, allow humanity to reflect back to itself, again reflecting from the perfect forms that are in the pleroma. Hopefully that answers it for you. If that's not clear enough, feel free to either email me or go ahead and comment further so that I can address it further. And thank you for being with us. Also, you have here, Kalamala says, I need to know more. Is our purpose to help women understand they are equal, or is it enough I understand this to be true? So whatever your seed purpose is, whatever your mission is, whatever your calling is, doing that is all you need to do. You don't need to purposely go around trying to spend all this attention and effort specifically pointing out women versus men and trying to elevate women or remind them they're co-equal to men. In fact, again, I probably didn't do a well enough job of explaining it's really about the male and female archetypes. The passive nature is just as important as the assertive nature. The assertive nature in overdrive is called aggression, and that often is not helpful if it is not tempered with the other side of the scale, which is the passive nature, the reflective nature, the one that contemplates. That's the whole purpose of Sophia, contemplating, that which brings about wisdom. So if we go about simply being will with no contemplation, no wisdom, then we are will out of control, and that becomes aggression, and it is reckless, really. It ends up in a reckless outcome. So this is what we're really talking about, but it does result in beginning to appreciate the inner world just as much as we appreciate the outer world, and supporting women, physical women's, meaning in the sex sense, does reflect on women's point of view, a way of doing things in a general sense, because women can be very similar to men and men can be very similar to women. You have some men that can be very feminine and then some men that can be very masculine, but we're talking about in a general sense that when we are elevating women in the sex sense, their sex, equal to men, we are then appreciating the way in which women express and do things in a general sense versus the way only men do things and only celebrating the way men do things. So it isn't necessary that you go about and you have to do that, but rather you can do it in subtle ways. You don't have to make it your life's mission or go about and pick out women and say, hey, did you know you're equal to us? That's not the way I intended that, and I'm not saying you're suggesting that's where you understood it, but you're just clarifying. Hopefully that is more clear to you now, what I was intending to say. And you also said, isn't it true that women, Mother of Heaven, while she is in contemplation, will not be equal until she is or are equal? In a spiritual sense, she is equal, so it's not necessarily that she is only equal at the point that she recognizes she's equal. In the way she sees herself, that is what can hold her down, and therefore she behaves and thinks and emotes as though she's not equal, and that behavior, that emotion, the way of thinking, then allows a space by which she is maltreated and put down and disrespected, and that she is, again, not equal. She's already equal in the eyes of the true Father in heaven and the Christ and the Sophia, the Mother and the Father, but rather that it's the way she sees herself in this realm, and she's contemplating on that, and she's rectifying that misunderstanding, that anomaly that she created when she didn't originally understand that, when she stood before the monad. And if so, is it very hard convincing or demonstrating to someone that they are equal when they choose to be? Right, absolutely. So it's not really your job, really, is what you're saying. It should be the job of that individual to find themselves and to have the experience to gain their confidence and their self-esteem and their self. Absolutely, I agree with that statement. If you carry about your calling and you are truly a follower of Christ and you follow his way and Sophia's way and the way that's been taught through the understanding the Gnostic text and the true message of Christ, the canonical text, then you will serve that purpose of assisting the female nature or the female spirit and understanding that it is co-equal to the male that we appreciate here in this realm. Another way of saying is the knowledge of good and evil. Neither good or evil are moralistic in that sense, but rather it's the way things are either created or promotes life or promotes destruction. And in this realm, that's a necessary component. That's what causes the recycling of everything and the renewing of everything. Death is a part of life in this realm. But it's understanding that also brings about free will. It's a very metaphysical, complicated position, but that confrontation is necessary for man to gain wisdom, but can only be carried out wisely and be instigated through gnosis. And so these two have to be present in order for man to practice his free will. So evil is that which divides, and think of the cell dividing. It then brings about a new creation. So it's not in a moralistic sense that this is being brought up, but it's in a spiritual sense, metaphorical sense. Thank you so much, Kalamala, for your great questions and comments. All right, so the last one here comes from Dorian Mary, where she says here, I'd like to understand better why the Apostle Paul didn't see men and women as equal, going even so far as to tell women to cover their hair because they are subservient to men under God's order of creation, and also because of the angels, the fallen ones who came to earth and took brides for themselves, as if that could happen again. All right, so this is a wonderful question. First off, let's say that in Gnosticism, we understand every one of the texts are through the lens of that writer, whether it be Paul, whether it be John, whether it be Philip, so forth and so on, Thomas. So they're given their account of what their inspired understanding of God is. So they will bring with them their own sort of context or their own set of beliefs, their own dogmas, as much as they may try to wash them away. Whatever the writings happen to be, they're going to be through that lens. So you're going to see that personality of Paul coming through. There are those who believe that the Bible is inerrant and there are no mistakes. And certainly, if that's how you understand that, that is certainly, I respect that. That's your take. What I will say beyond that now, if that's the way you understand it, then we'll go into those particular passages. I'm going to present to you a different understanding of Paul than maybe what's popular out there, the sort of that consensus that we mass stream understanding of who Paul is and what he's saying in those particular verses in Corinthians. And then, of course, the rest is up to you. Now, I'll also point out a couple of comments here from Percival 1137 says, I pay no attention to Paul. He didn't even know Jesus. Wanting to encourage you one way or the other, it's up to you how much you weigh what Paul has to say versus what Christ has to say. However, I'm of the sentiment that what's most important is the takeaway messages, and I'm not suggesting you're not saying that, but I'm preempting that as a way to move on to what I'm getting ready to follow that as we get into some of these verses. And secondly, I've typically put a lot more weight on what Christ said than what maybe Paul had to say. And Christ made it very clear, both in the canonical text and in the Gnostic text, that men and women are equal. He even pointed that out when he said that there is no longer men and women. There's no Jew and Gentile. That's his way of suggesting, my point of view, that everybody's equal. And then JDR 189 says, the Roman used the new religion to increase control of the populace. They were invested in compiling the contents of the Bible, and they were not egalitarian. This also had an influence, so I agree here. Again, it's that influence that Paul lived under, so as much as he tried to maybe wash it out of a system, some of it was still there. Or another take is, and this is the one I'm suggesting, is he often peppered his conversation to the Corinthians or the Romans, whoever he was speaking to, the Ephesians, with the language they were familiar with, as a way to get them to open up, helping them to be more open to Christ's message. And I'm going to show you that way that I'm seeing Paul is trying to practice within the context that GDR is suggesting here. The Corinthians and the Romans, they lived in a society that wasn't very egalitarian. And so this is something that Paul had to contend with. And so he spoke somewhat in their language to sort of reel them in. And then once they felt comfortable with him, then he presented near the end, or in a very sort of subtle way, the takeaway message. And then GDR says this is also why the Gnostic ancient mystery school ideas were encoded within the text, alongside the masking of Jesus' underlying teachings hinted at within his various, I don't know what he meant here, maybe sermons or whatever. But absolutely well said. And it's also why the Gnostic texts were put in a jar, and many of them were persecuted and hung on cross and upside down, and the religion was taken underground. So that should tell you something right there. All right, so with that, let's go over to Corinthians, Dory and Mary. And let's first address the chapter and verse that you're implying here about women covering their hair. So this is in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Recall that these headings are not in the original scrolls or text. They're added by whoever is translating. In this case, it's the NIV, New International Version. I'm using this version because this is what's in modern time the most accepted version. And you can use these different versions and really have quite a different takeaway. But I'm going to use this version because I understand that those that tend to be in the more conservative churches also tend to use the NIV. So the first thing, that takeaway we get from chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians is how Paul is talking to the Corinthians in some of the things that are important in the rituals and rules, guidelines, in the way in which they run their churches. So he says, follow the way of love and eagerly desire gifts of spirit, especially prophecy. The first thing he mentions is love and desire gifts of the Spirit. And he points out prophecy. Why? Because the Corinthians were very big on speaking in tongues and prophecies. This is really big to them. He is not suggesting here, in my opinion, he's not suggesting prophecy is somehow more important. He's appealing to them. He's saying that I know this is important to you, so let's make this a point then. For anyone who speaks in tongues does not speak to people, but to God. Indeed, no one understands them. They utter mysteries by the Spirit. But the one who prophesies speaks to people for their strengthening and encouraging and comfort. Now, what he's saying here is that those that speak in prophecy, most people don't even understand what they're saying. It's just gobbledygook, right? But to him, he's trying to point out that what's the point of prophecy if people don't even understand it, right? That's more important. Anyone who speaks in tongues edifies themselves, but the one who prophesies edifies the church. This is the system he's using. He's pointing out the way that people are using prophecy, that just prophecy, that message of prophecy, just behaving with speaking in tongues, that should be good enough. Oh, look at me, I prophesy on the outside. I speak in tongues. Isn't that a beautiful thing? And don't I follow the way of God? Well, he's saying, okay, that's great, but it's not as great as if you are speaking in a way that people understand you, that ultimately edifies the church. That's the most important thing. And that's what he's saying. Then we go on to number 6. It goes on and says, now, brother and sister, if I come to you and speak in tongues, what good will I be to you unless I bring you some revelation or knowledge or prophecy or word of instruction? So this is the same thing. He's talking about you're just speaking gobbledygook. Unless you really follow it up with something that people can grasp and get. If then I do not grasp the meaning of what someone is saying, I am a foreigner to the speaker, and the speaker is a foreigner to me. So it is with you. Since you are eager for gifts of the Spirit, try to excel in those that build up the church. And here's the key again. What builds up the church? So he's saying this in a very subtle, gentle way. He's really making it clear, I understand your rituals. I respect them. I'm not telling you not to do them. But understand that the message of Christ is that they're really pointless if they don't ultimately lead to love and edifying the body, which is the church, the people in the church. If they're not ultimately somehow bringing up that body of people, then it's pointless. All right, so 13. For this reason, the one who speaks in tongues should pray that they may interpret what they say. All right, now, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, because we're going to have to get down to verse 30 to address women speaking in the church or wearing cloth over their head. I thank God that I speak in tongues more than all of you, but in the church I would rather speak 5 intelligible words to instruct others than 10,000 words in a tongue. So the key here is that, are you edifying the church or not? Because you can speak in tongue all day till you're blue in the face, but nobody understands you, then what's the point? All right, so that goes on. 22, tongues then then are a sign not for believers, but for unbelievers. Prophecy, however, is not for unbelievers, but for believers. So, in other words, your tongues are pointless unless you actually have a way you can interpret it. So the whole church comes together and everyone speaks in tongues. And inquirers or unbelievers come in. Will they not say you are out of your mind? And that would actually distract people and not encourage them to be part of your church. So they will fall down and worship God, exclaiming, God is really among you, if you actually interpret. And he says here, but if an unbeliever or an inquirer comes in while everyone is prophesying, they are convicted of sin and are brought under judgment by all, as the secrets of their hearts are laid bare. Now, remember that in Gnostic texts, we consider sin as missing the mark of understanding, okay? So this, again, is talking about intelligence. It's not talking about morals. It's talking about, are they living under that code of sin that then brings them under judgment? Or will they awaken? They are convicted of that sin and brought under judgment by all, as the secrets of their hearts are laid bare. And they'll come to see that that's no longer necessary. Christ came and fulfilled the prophecies and the laws so that they are no longer necessary. He didn't do away with them, he fulfilled them. And that ultimately to go and sin no more doesn't mean you don't sin anymore. It just means no longer allow sin to control your life. That's all. And allow yourself to see yourself as elevated and at the level of the Christ. Have I not said ye are God? God is really among you. Good order in worship. Number 26. What then shall we say, brothers and sisters, when you come together, each of you have a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or interpret. Everything must be done so the church may be built up. So that's really the takeaway here. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and to God. Now here's the key. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and to God. We want to highlight that because this is going to be very important to verse 34 when women are brought up here. Number 29, 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. So in other words, don't be so pious, don't be so hubristic to think that you may have this inspiration, that you have a prophecy or you have something important to share with the church, but that it really literally is from God. Make sure you got other people there that are also listening or weighing in. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop, for you can all prophesy in turn so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. In other words, multiple points of view. The spirits of the prophets are subject to the control of the prophets. So in other words, you can manage this. So it's not like the spirits are just like taking your body over and possessing you, and you can't manage, I'm going to start speaking and then I'm going to stop speaking. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people. Now we're going to get into verse 34. Now, again, remember, Paul is pointing out their practice first, then he follows it up with his own comment about the way of love, the way of edifying the church, the way of elevating everybody and making everybody co-equal in the church, and no longer seeing sin the way we're looking at it, but rather understanding it's seeing ourselves as less than, not worthy of the good news. All right, this is what he keeps pointing out in every one of his chapters. All right, so now he's doing the same here when he brings up women. He says women should remain silent in the church. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. Now he's bringing up the law. Remember, Paul's the very one who says that Christ is the one who fulfilled the laws and the prophets. So if he's fulfilled them once and for all, then why should men follow the law? So he's not saying follow the law. He's just merely quoting what the law says. All right? Again, persuading them he appreciates and understands what they follow and why they follow it. And it goes on, if they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Now again, Paul's not making a statement of the way that Christ said to him, tell this to the people. But he's saying to the Corinthians, I know this is the way you've been taught by the law. It even says, as the law says, right? This is what you've been taught, right? Number 34. And you know this because this is what he does with everything. He first brings up the topic, then he follows it up with an instruction about the new way, the good news, all right? So he's doing the same here. So what's the new instruction? He says, this is what the law says, all right? 34 and 35. But 36, he says, or, in other words, this is different from what you've been taught by the law. Or, did the word of God originate with you? Or, are you the only people it has reached? So in other words, is it only men? Is it only the Hebrews? Are you the only one that knows the exact way to do things? or is God in every one of us? If anyone thinks they are a prophet or otherwise gifted by the Spirit, let them acknowledge that what I am writing to you is the Lord's command. But if anyone ignores this, they will themselves be ignored. So what is he saying here? If anyone thinks they are a prophet or otherwise gifted by the Spirit. So in other words, if you believe that you are inspired by God, whether you're male or female, all right, let them acknowledge that what I am writing to you is the Lord's command. In other words, you have that power in you. But if anyone ignores this, they themselves will be ignored. So women are being ignored in the church because that's what everyone believes they should be. They should be ignored. Men believe it. I'm not saying now, but particularly back then. And women also believe it. And that's why they remain silent. And if that's what you believe, then you'll be ignored. But on the other hand, if you think that you are a prophet or otherwise gifted by the Spirit, let them acknowledge that what I am writing to you is the Lord's command. In other words, he didn't say it directly, but he opened up that question to get people to meditate on that possibility. He had to say it very softly. Or did the Word of God originate with you? Or are you the only people it has reached? So this is another way of saying, yes, men and women can speak in the church. Therefore, my brother and sisters, be eager to prophesy. Otherwise, he wouldn't end it here. Because the women weren't supposed to speak in the church, then why is he including sisters here? You see that? He's ending at this. He's saying, brothers and sisters, both of you be eager to prophesy. Do not forbid speaking in tongues, but everything should be done in a fitting and orderly manner. Everything should be done. Nothing's forbidden. It's all permissible. Now, of course, anybody reading this and doesn't understand the Gnostic text and really understands the equity of the message that Christ is trying to get across, they're not going to see this. They're just going to think Paul's reinforcing the notion that men are superior, to women, and that women shouldn't speak in the church, that they only should, what does it say here? Remain silent in the church. They're not allowed to speak, but must be submissive. They want to inquire about something, they should ask their husbands at home. Or it's disgraceful for women to speak in the church. This is as the law says, but then he says, 36, or did the Word of God originate with you? Did it originate only with men? Through men only? Did it originate only with the Hebrew or the Corinthians? Is it possible there's another way of thinking of this? Therefore, my brothers and sisters, be eager to prophesy. Do not forbid speaking in tongues. All right, now let's go over to the next verse that's often quoted in Corinthians to suggest women are less than men. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, NIV again. It says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So he's saying, follow my example, already suggesting that it implies that maybe you aren't, okay? Paul was already kind of borderline hyper-confident, or I don't want to say the word arrogant, but he, think about what he did with some of the Christians, right? Before he met Christ, right? So he's saying, okay, I'm going to address this thing about women having to cover their heads. So this is what I'm going to address to you. And again, he's coming in, massaging them, reciting to them exactly what they believe. All right, verse 2. I praise you for remembering me and everything, and for holding to the traditions just as I passed them on to you. So he praises them because that's flattery, right? The last time I saw you, I shared with you these traditions and you're still holding to them. But I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Now, one would think, like when we use the word head, we're thinking of a hierarchy, right? This is what already comes up, right, people's minds. They're thinking, okay, well, God is superior to Christ, Christ is superior to man, and man is superior to woman. This is the way we're going to understand it. My belief is that Paul did this purposely. So verse 4, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. So keep in mind this tradition. Why men shouldn't have long hair. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. But if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should cover her head. Now again, remember, he's reciting what they already believed, their tradition. 7. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. It is for this reason that a woman ought to have authority over her own head, because of the angels. Okay, so verse 10 is very quickly implying something very different. Now, why all of a sudden this complete turnaround? Here it's saying, it is for this reason that a woman ought to have authority over her own head, because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. woman. For as woman came from man, so also man is born a woman. But everything comes from God. So what is he saying here? Again, he's doing the same technique that he always does. He massages them with their tradition. He opens it up. I understand it. I know it well. So you don't need to come at me, but I'm going to massage it. I'm going to invite you to consider something different. What he's literally saying here, like this is the way I'm understanding it. He's saying that you think of it as a hierarchy when it's not a hierarchy. But in fact, everything comes from everything else. It emanates from God, the Father. Whatever's in the Father is in the Christ, and whatever's in the Christ is in the man, and whatever's in the man is also in the woman. And that's what he means. It is for this reason that a woman ought to have authority over her own head. So in other words, this is the point he's making. Not that he agrees with all this. He's saying that it is because of the angels. What the heck does angels have to do with it? Remember, the angels are the archons. That's the reason women ought to have authority over their own head as to whether they should cut their hair or not, they should cover it or not. That should be up to the woman. Why? It's because of the angels. Remember, who are the angels? They are created by the demiurge. And it's for this reason that woman ought to have authority over her own head. Meaning, in other words, it's for this reason Sophia should recognize she is not less than the angels. The angels don't have authority over her. And in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, so also man born of woman. Meaning, in other words, male and female. Again, everything comes from God. That's the point he's making. He's not making the points up here. These are just pointed out as a way to massage what they already believe. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. He's just telling them this is the way you see things. So this brings dishonor to each other. Men can't have long hair. Men can't cover their head. Women can't uncover their head. They can't have short hair. Oughtn't a woman be able to reason for herself what she can do and have that own authority? That's what he's saying. So 13 says, judge for yourselves. So he's literally trying to put seeds of doubt into the way of their traditions and getting them to consider. And maybe that way isn't really ultimately beneficial for either men or women. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? He's asking. Does not the very nature of things teach you that if a man has long hair, it is disgraceful to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For long hair is given to her as a covering. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. So what is he saying here? He's saying that if this is all your belief, is hinged on or dependent upon, then it's not much. It's flimsy. Whether your hair is long or not, is that what God's all about? That's what he's literally asking you. Of course, he's not saying it to you clearly, because if you said that at that time, then literally the Gnostics were chased out of town or hung on cross or killed. So he had to be very careful. This is what we have to remember. And then to take it home even further, remember these headings are added by the scholars that are interpreting the text, and they'll be different in different translations. King James Version has a different heading. So this isn't even part of it. So this is a continuation of thought from verse 13 through 16. So he says, in the following directive, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good. So he's literally telling them that way of doing things, I don't praise it. What I do praise, however, he opened up saying, I praise it. What he's praising, I praise you for remembering me in everything, and for holding to the traditions just as I pass them on to you. So he's not saying, I praise you that you are holding on those traditions just for the sake of holding on. He's saying because you remember me, and you honor me that you remember me that much, and that you honor me that you believe what I shared with you and taught you. But ultimately, I have no praise for you. In verse 18, in the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and to some extent, I believe it. No doubt, there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. So then, when you come together, it is not the Lord's supper you eat, for when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. So who's getting drunk and who's hungry? Well, it's like, okay, well, you've got long hair, you're a guy, so you go hungry. You're a woman, you got short hair, so you go hungry. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? Certainly not in this matter. matter. So there you go. I mean, take it or leave it. That's the way I'm understanding it. This is the way that Paul does it. And if you use that method, it will not fail every single time. And it will answer to those that have the confusion about the contradictions that Paul seems to present in his writings. There's time and time again, it seems like Paul's contradicting himself. On the one hand, the laws and the prophets, and man, doesn't have to worry about, everything's permitted and everything is prudent. But on the other hand, he's saying, God says do this and you have to follow the law. And on the other hand says, Christ died for the law and it's by grace you're saved. So which one is it? Well, it's because it's the way people are understanding when they're reading the script. They don't understand that Paul is using a method. He's massaging them with the way they understand their traditions and their laws to show them he understands them. That he's even responsible for teaching them that way. But now I want you to see a new way, a new example. Now this Christ man came. This Jesus man came. And he was the first to understand Gnosis, the Christ. I want you to now follow that. That's where it opens up. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So if they were already following Paul, which he says they were in verse 2, then why would he then open it up by saying, follow my example? That's another way of saying you're not really following my example anymore. I have a new way that I'm getting ready to show you, right? All right, hopefully that makes it clear. I don't know if that addresses your concerns, Dorina Mary, but that's what I have for you. Feel free to ask further follow-up questions if you want to in the comment section of any of the upcoming videos, so I'll know that they're there, or you can email me directly at the First Gnostic Church of Christ. If you want to continue this conversation, feel free to do so. Again, I want to thank everybody who's been following the First Gnostic Church of Christ up to now. We have 2,500 plus followers and going on 8 years now, and especially want to say thank you for those that have been following us from the very beginning, as we talked about Peter and Horseradish or any of others. To everyone else that's new to the channel, welcome, and hope you'll continue with us. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, have a blessed day.